Hello, my dear friends. My name is Nikolai Rutyunov. I'm from St. Petersburg, and I'm glad to see you on our Philosophical Sobor. Oh, Alexander Gelich. Hello. What?
Oh,
Happily, Alexander Gelich with us. So I want to say the first some thanks. And first of all, to Sofia Polyankina. She is with us today, and she's the head of our group of translators. Sofia has made a big job. Without her help, this collection of articles and today's Sobor won't taken place. And also, I want to say some words about Sobor. Daria Dugina, Andrei Korbov-Latintsev, and I made a decision 2 years ago to create an intellectual platform to discuss the place of special military operation in Russian history and in world history and its philosophical meaning. And now I want to give a word to Alexander Gelievich Dugin. Alexander Gelievich, please.
Thanks. I would like to say hello to all our friends from Europe, from Middle East. Hi all.
hello.
So the idea of rectification of the names, it is the part of the Chinese culture. So that is maybe a key to understand what Confucianism is. So the names given to the things are wrong. And starting from this conclusion, there is a big and huge quest of the humanity to improve them, to rectify them, to find the proper names for the proper things. So that is the main challenge of Chinese culture. And we, some time ago, when special military operations started, my daughter and her friends, Nikolai, the philosopher Korbov-Latintsev, who is fighting in precisely in this special military operation, is soldier philosopher, and some other friends of her, of Daria, they have decided to apply this Confucianist principle to Russian situation. So how we should correctly name or call special military operation, how correctly we would like to define what is global world order, what is the conflict, clashes of the civilizations, how we need to define it, how we should describe them correctly. That was the main idea of rectification of names. And during 2 years, we tried to proceed in this way, in this direction. So we need to find to choose the correct names for the correct events, for the events that now are in the center of our attention, global attention. So first of all, we started with idea to refuse to call this special military operation and to insist on the term the war. So that was very important. Now we could say that we have won, because now in Russia we could say special military operation or the war. So we have insisted on the calling the war, the name by the proper name, the war. And we tried from the very beginning to define what kind of war is it? The war between who? Between whom? Between two states, maybe two people, two nations, and trying to clarify, rectify that we have arrived to the conclusion that well, we are witnesses of the civilization war. So we called this war civilization war, not national war, not just border conflicts between two states, something much more important, much deeper. That was the case. So we started to clarify the nature of this war, and we have arrived at the conclusion that this war is going on between two civilizations, opposite, two contrary civilizations. But how we could correctly call them? So, and we tried to apply different topologies on that. First of all, geopolitics. In the geopolitics, it is absolutely clear what is going on. So that is the war between sea power and land power, as always, as during last 2, maybe 3 centuries. So applying geopolitical theory to this war in the Ukraine, we come to the conclusion that we have two civilizations, or thalassocracy, and tellurocracy, sea power and land power. What is sea power? That is global NATO Atlantis Pact. That is continuation of Anglo-Saxon vision of the world. So Anglo-Saxon pole was incorporated, embodied in the British Empire. After that, during period between the First and Second World War, that was the shift from British Island to North America. And North America, after the Second World War, became precisely this manifestation of the sea power. And the conflict between sea power and land power, it is the main rule of the geopolitical vision and representation of the world history. So the end of the Soviet Union and the end of the Soviet bloc, Warsaw Pact, was, geopolitically speaking, just the consequences of the victories of the sea power over land power. So, and Rimland, that is the zone, intermediary zone between sea power, land power, or combined mixed civilization of the Western Europe, Middle East, Far East, all this zone on the shore of Eurasia, or the borderline of Eurasia, where Eurasia encounters the oceans, the seas. All this Rimland zone was normally that space of confrontation between sea power and land power. And the end of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact signified just the fall and decline of the land power in favor of the sea power, and the instauration of the control of the West as sea power over Oriental Eastern Europe was just a kind of growth of the Rimland controlled by sea power. And the rests of the Soviet Union were considered precisely in this logic. So Ukraine and Belarus and other post-Soviet countries were just zone of Rimland. So the fight between land power and sea power was reduced and shifted to the east, to the heartland. We have lost the influence over these zones, and our enemies, sea power, have won the control over them. So that was pure geopolitical zero-sum game. One, if you don't win, you lose. If you don't lose, you win. So we have lost, they have won. And there came the moment to define the fate, geopolitical fate of Ukraine. Because Ukraine still managed and used to be a kind of bipolar entity, somehow in favor of Russia, somehow in favor of NATO, trying to get into the European Union, but wanting to conserve relations with Moscow, some in energy issues, in other cultural, political issues. So that was a mixed Rimland imposed on the zone that was before the part of the heartland, the part of the land power, the ground of the historical birth of our people, Eastern slave and Slavs, and that was the case. So we have lost in this battle, and the winner, the sea power, wanted to expand the zone of their influence on the behalf of us. So that was clear. And applying that to the situation of special military operation in Ukraine, we have immediately received a geopolitical explanation of what is going on there. And if we consult the text of Zbigniew Brzezinski, American writer, an American geopolitician, so we have the clear confirmation of that. According to the Great Chessboard, the book of Brzezinski, Ukraine is the key issue between the possibility of the Russia to return to be a global land power and its definitively ending of this mission. And if Ukraine belongs to the West, so Russia will never be capable to return as great power. So that was clear definition. So if we consider special military operation and this light, we could rectify all the names, all the mutual accusations between belligerent parties to impose them on the map of the geopolitics. So that was clear rectification of name. So nothing personal, nothing, that was not conflict between Russians and Ukrainians, not between Russian Federation and Ukrainian state, not of the sort, but just the battlefield between civilization of sea against civilization of land, and the civilization of sea attacked and attacks because it wants more expansion on the behalf of us, and we are on defense. So in that sense, Ukrainian war is defensive war of Russia as land power. So that is extremely important to understand what is going on then there, and to predict what will go in the future. So Russia could not just be satisfied with having a control over eastern part of Ukraine, but will stop this war only when all the territory of Ukraine will be under our influence, and no before that. So not because of the special aggressivity of Russia, but because it is the minimal proportions to keep the geopolitical sovereignty of civilization of land. And interesting, so to this geopolitical aspect of the interpretation of the special military operation was added as well cultural dimension. So because from geopolitics to civilization, we need some more than just strategical interests. So cultural dimension. And that was very easy to see where it is. It is precisely in the fact that today globalization and the West and sea power civilization is represented by the very special radically anti-traditional values. So that was not the case always. That is a kind of new elements because now the sea power is represented by LGBT plus, by feminism, by attack against the traditional family, that is the migration, that is destruction of the national states. So the modern Western civilization represents not only just strategical bloc, but as well a kind of global challenge, global universal set of values that all of them are radically anti-traditional. So responding, answering to this civilizational demand in the last 2 years, Putin and Russia have accepted the ideology of the defense of the traditional values. So we have added to this war very important dimension: defense of the traditional values against LGBT, against homosexual marriages, against destruction of the family, against materialistic anti-religious stand of the Western civilization. And that was implemented by the decree of Putin during this war. And we have started our process of the philosophical analysis of the special military operation before that. So we started this discussion, the process of rectification of the name before this decree were accepted. So we have a kind of prepared the path, the way for that intellectually. And the Daria was in the center of this process. So we have foreseen this geopolitical and civilizational adjustments that was made afterwards by our government, because we, on the intellectual level, and our governors, our government, we follow the same direction on the different level, on the intellectual and on the practical level. And intellectual thought of us was ahead a bit of the concrete political decision of our governments and precisely of Mr. Putin. So we started to rethink and revise special military operation. We started the process to give to this operation correct names. Just before that was done, the same thing was done on the level of the governmental decisions. That, I think, that was important. And now we see that Mr. Putin has recognized this war as civilizational war. He has blamed the Western civilization, modern Western globalist civilization, as satanic. And that is very important because it adds as well religious, metaphysical aspect to this conflict between sea power and land power, because today's West is not just the West as it was, but that is a kind of postmodern version or globalist version of the Western civilization, openly satanic, and that was recognized by Putin and by government. So we started the process of the rectification of the name just in the moment when this civilization war started. And after that, during 2 years and some months more, we have been witnesses of how it was accepted, our position or our premonition, our kind of prophetic, metaphysical and philosophical description of the nature of the conflict was certified and acknowledged by Russian government. So that is extremely important, I think, and I guess that there is no some cause-effect chain of the events. That was not just the so simplistic understanding. We have announced that, and the government and Russian Federation has accepted that. No, that was not linear influence. That was more than that. That was discovery of the deep logic of global world history and Russian history, and we followed this line, this logic, by our philosophical means whenever the government and the state followed the same line by its means, and maybe reacting against challenges, trying to adapt Russia to the situation that was created, not by the will of Russian government, but that was imposed somehow by the West. But the result was the kind of convergence, of total convergence between our philosophical description, avant la date in French, before the moment when it happened. It has happened as political decision. We have explored and defined the situation, the field, conceptual field of this war before it happened on the political level. That is, I think, the main task and mission of the correct intellectuals to follow the logic of the history, of the geopolitics, of the civilizational conflicts, on the religious explanation of the meaning of the events, and not just to follow the orders already undertaken by political authorities. So the thought should go ahead in the front before a political decision, and that is the dignity of the real patriotic intellectuals. And to conclude, I would like to say that the same conflict between Russia and the West on the civilizational level now is clearly, that is new step and the rectification of the names. Now Russian conflicts, it should be put inside of the broader context, because now we are living in the moment of the war between unipolar world order and the multipolar world order. And Russia started this fight on the behalf of the multipolar world order against those who wanted at any price to save desperately unipolar world order before the other poles, before China, before Islamic civilization, before India, before Africa, before Latin America. We were first, but we fought, and we are still fighting, not only for our national interests. We are fighting against the globalist pretension of the Western sea power to organize the universal flood over the humanity, to take the control over all existing civilizations. So we just started the fight against this unipolarity, and there was the second step. There was the second recent front of the same fight opened in the Middle East, because the Palestine now is the next battlefield between multipolar world order, where Islamic civilization is targeted in this war, but this Islamic civilization should respond to the act of the clear aggression of the Western sea power against Islamic power. And Shia is already involved in that, and we see how dramatic the Shia fight of Houthi, of Yemenites, of resistance power in Syria and Palestine is, and how what the price Iran pays now, Shia Iran Islamic pole pays for its resistance against that. So we have two fronts, and the third front of the same war of multipolarity against unipolarity is coming. That is Taiwan issue. That is more and more in the center of global attention. So we need to give the right names for the concrete events and the process on the global level in order to manifest, to correctly describe the reality of the events and to be immune to the globalist propaganda against us, against Muslims, against Shia, against Palestinians, who are now the victims of the real genocide. The Palestinians are victims of the genocide, and Russian population of the east of the Ukraine is and was the victims of the real genocide, not accomplished only by Western Ukrainians, by the Western power, the real masters of all these zones of conflicts. The real masters are globalists, are representative of the sea power, and this globalist satanic civilization, as it was called by Mr. Putin. So I think that the initiative of Daria and her friends, young Eurasianists, young philosophers, patriotic artists, and intellectuals, was very, very important in order to improve the understanding of the geopolitical and eschatological and philosophical and metaphysical nature of the moment where we live in the world history, and that is why publication and publishing of this volume of the articles and the speeches is so important, because it shows how this not evident process of the correct interpretation of the events, dramatic events in Ukraine and on the global scale, how it had started. And that explains why we became the targets of the globalists. That explains why they try to kill us, why they have killed my daughter, who was in the center of this process. One they tried to kill me, one they tried to kill Fico, the president of Slovakia, one they have killed so many Palestinians in Gaza, or why they have killed Iranian President Raisi, with whom, by the way, we have met with my friend Nader Talebzadeh, and who has passed away as well. So that is metaphysical, intellectual fight when the real philosophers, real thinkers, real political people who decide on the political level, who are victims of this fight. That is not just political fight, and that is why they target intellectuals when they destroy the people, the population, all those who represent this deep identity of our civilization. Christian Orthodox civilization, Russian civilization, Islamic civilization, Palestinian, Middle Eastern civilization, Chinese civilization, and all the African civilization, and all other. So we are in a war. And the war of ideas is not less intensive and radical and dramatic than the war of armies. And the losses we experience and the blows we receive and the tragedy we live through are the same. That is the unique war that should be called by its real name. So that is why rectification of the name is so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Professor Dugin, for your topical and very inspiring talk. Unfortunately, dear participants, we are pressed for time and we have no time for questions and answers. I hope that you will understand us and forgive us for that. So now I'm going to give the floor to Nikolai Rutunov, who is the sociologist, the head of the cultural space, the Son of the North. He's going to speak about ideological concept, meeting in a new place. So Nikolai, please, you're welcome.
Thank you, Sofia. Dear friends, I will speak about ideological concept meeting in a new place, and I will take maybe 5 minutes only. So today we're in a situation where the old ideological models have been destroyed, but still retain their influence on the minds of the majority of the intellectuals in the world and Russia. The classic stream of right-wing ideologies for the first half of the 20th century was as follows: capitalism, free market, plus national culture based on religion. For left-wing ideologies, it looked this way: socially oriented economy plan plus removal of traditional beacons in culture, emancipation from bourgeois foundations. Today, Russia, this confrontation between left and right exists mainly on the aesthetic level. The monarchists glorify Kolchak and Alexander III. The communists glorify Dzerzhinsky and Stalin. Now we can even speak of a certain convergence of positions. The Russian communists recognize orthodoxy, at least culturally, as having a central function in the construction of civilization and advocate the preservation of traditional Russian culture. The Russian right wing recognizes the need for the state control of large-scale industry and advocates social guarantees for citizens. The protection of the traditional family and the Russian state is a common ground for patriotic intellectuals and enthusiasts. The real enemy of the forces mentioned above is hiding in plain sight under the guise of liberalism. It is under the guise because this is not classical liberalism, but what it has become in the last 30 years. Having moved from the position of a free market to a market where there is a place only for the large players, multinational companies that absorb medium and small entrepreneurs in any country of the world. From the model of domination of the Eurocentric culture of the burden of the white man to the ideology of the continuum, that is, man as a individual to infinite eternity. Entities of variable gender within the ever-expanding LGBT plus agenda, which in fact means the destruction of the traditional anthropological type as such, the dehumanization of a person. Russia is a country civilization, absorbs as a country civilization absorbs the living juices of hundreds of cultures of ethnic groups inhabiting its expanses. Russia will always transcend any ideologies and formulas, but new meanings and concepts are needed for the joint activity of healthy patriotic forces because new wine cannot be poured into old fuels. I believe that introduction of the concept of meeting in a new place is a necessary step. So, meeting in a new place, it is a concept aimed at creating an intellectual space where representatives of different political views can come together to return the essence of existing concepts and categories and develop new ones based on the idea of the purpose of Russian history, the need to preserve and develop Russian statehood, as well as a traditional large family as the foundation societies. It is important that for the Russian left and right, the special military operation can be seen as a meeting in a new place. On the front line, there are almost no classical or new liberals. However, on the borders of the defense of the motherland, both monarchists and Stalinists who believe in God or justice stand side by side today. Glorify to our warriors. They are now faced with military tasks. Our future depends directly on them. The task of the intellectuals in the rear is to move from pickering and cursing to understanding the ongoing processes as processes of renewal, out of which new meanings and words should be forged. The condition for the beginning of the Russian future should be created by a philosophical and conceptual language. The fact that the concept of the rear has become relative is shown by the murders of Daria Dugina and Maxim Fomin, who is well known as Vladlen Tatarsky. It requires not only the spiritual mobilization of every intellectual, but also active assistance to the front, the trips to the locations where the war is being fought, in order to find and articulate new words to build the architecture of a coherent ideology. So thank you, my friends.
Thank you so much, Nikolai. You stayed within the time limit. Unbelievable. Thank you. So now I'm going to present my short talk. I'm an independent English language and philosophy teacher and translator from Novosibirsk, Russia. And I was responsible for translating the collection of the papers that you received, the Philosophical Sobor, the Great Russian Rectification of Names in memory of Daria Dugina. And I wasn't alone, so I managed and supervised the team of 7 ladies who were volunteering to be at the forefront of the battle of ideas and to translate the texts that were written by our prominent thinkers and philosophers. And it's a great honor for me to be involved in it and to be the editor-in-chief and translator-in-chief. So while translating the texts and editing them, I couldn't shake off the idea that in the modern world, in the modern battle of ideas, and in the modern information war, translators and interpreters act as adjutants in the battlefield of ideas. So I wanted to compare and to give you this metaphor to think of translators as adjutants of the warriors. The warriors are the thinkers and philosophers in this case, of course. It seems to me that the role of translators of philosophical texts in this case and adjutants, they are the same because we focus on the task of getting the message across. And we are faced with the same challenges, pretty much same challenges. First of all, we are intermediaries. It means that we must bridge the divides, so the cultural, linguistic divides, or as adjutants who are a liaison between military commanders and units, or between different units in the war. Of course, we must ensure that the intended messenger of the author, of the writer, whether it be a philosophical concept or a strategic comment, it is transmitted accurately and effectively. So we must preserve the original intent and potency. We face the following challenges: strategic communication and adaptation of the message. We must also ensure clarity and cohesion. We must decide on the dilemma of accuracy and accessibility of the texts. That is the major problem from my point of view, because we need to choose either our texts are accurate and they show all the complexity of the message, all the cultural richness and wealth of this thought, or the texts are accessible and understandable by the recipient of the target language. So sometimes it's very tricky. I would like to demonstrate this challenge with the example of Sobor versus Council. So probably you wondered, what does this word Sobor mean in the name of our conference? I also supplied the word conference for you not to be confused by that. So basically the word Sobor has the equivalent in English language, which is council. However, while discussing it, and I remember that we had a little debate with Nikolai about that, we decided to stick to the Russian word, Sobor. What does this word mean? So Sobor, it derives from the verb собирать, which means to gather people or to collect things. And it has the following connotations in Russian language. Originally, it was the name of the cathedral and the gathering of the people, including the clergy and the laity, in this cathedral. However, later it transcended such religious meaning, and by Sobor, historically in Russia, were called the gatherings of the people who decided on the destiny of Russia. That is why there are following connotations: spirituality. So Sobor is always a spiritual gathering. Unity, community, collective decision making, and ethos of collective identity over individualism. So these are the shades of meaning of the word Sobor. So I hope that now it's clear for you. Let's compare it to council. So what does the council mean? So this word is an English word, and basically it has pretty much the same etymology. So to gather people, to shout, to call them in one place, to bring them together to decide on some important things. So it refers to some assemblies of individuals for consultation, for decision making. However, it has a bit different connotation compared to Sabor. So because it is more secular, so it didn't have the meaning of spirituality. So practicality is another shade of meaning of the word council. Policy formulation, governance, democratic values that it also transmits, and administrative traditions of the English-speaking world. So these are the connotations of the word council. So that is why, considering weighing all pros and cons, we decided to stick to the word sabor and to preserve it in the name of our philosophical gathering. And that's why you can see it on the cover of the collection of papers and in the name of today's event as well. So another Russian word for you to know now. And finally, I would like to finish by saying that translators should be really treated as adjutants in the modern realia, because we delve into the complex interplay of interpretation, ideologies, and together with the thinkers, with the philosophers, we are at the forefront of the creative struggle to convey meaning and navigate philosophical minefields. So thank you so much for your attention. And I would like to continue with the next speaker. So the next speaker is Syed Almas Haider Shah, who is a foreign policy and diplomatic correspondent from Islamabad, Pakistan. And the topic of Syed is civilizational states and pluralistic structures of multipolar world order. So Syed promised to speak a bit longer. However, there are no questions, so I hope that you will still be in time. So please take the floor, Syed.
Okay, thank you very much to the organizers of Philosophical Sobor, the Great Russian Rectification of the Names, for providing me the opportunity to speak such prestigious and scholastic community from different part of the world. So I'm going to talk about the civilizational state and states and the pluralistic structures of multipolar world order. So my story begins with the two processes. The processes are post-Cold War international political environment underwent the two basic processes caused by the variation of the global distribution of power in terms of polar transition, and the second one is the civilizational revolution. So the polar transition from bipolar world to unipolar movement, then the multipolar order, putting state into the imperative conditions to adjust and readjust their political preferences, shape and reshape of their alliances in pursuance of respective nationalistic interests. The second process evolved with the rejection of universalization of liberal values rooted in supremacy of the West, evolved with the deepest sense of distinct identity and the self in self-help based system that invites the implications for uh, evolving polycentric global order. So, in my understanding, the both processes have overlapping effects on each other, as the multipoles are representing right now the different civilizational identities. So, these this presentation attempts to analyze the key assumptions concerning the civilizational states, pluralistic structures, and multipolarity, raising the basic questions. For example, why states are branding themselves as a civilization state? How civilization states are different than the nation states? To what extent civilization serves as agency to stimulate states' foreign policy actions? And how key pluralistic structures are shaping the multipolar world order. So let's begin with the first questions. Why states are branding themselves as a civilization state? So this is a very crucial question. Why states subscribes to identity politics and brand themselves as a civilization state, bringing culture back into the national polity. Obviously, post Cold War variation in power capabilities, especially the US led unipolarity, provided the conditions to the revisionist states to realign their priorities to challenge the monopoly of the single actors, uh, monopoly over the system. Secondly, the international liberal order is considered as a project of cultural imperialism. States with centuries old civilizations, cultural and moral values are not subscribing liberalist, globalist, and universalist agenda and brand themselves as a civilization state. So, liberal standardization, monistic universalism is considered responsible for suppression of diversity. So, liberalizing one's economy, politics, and society is seen as participating in certain forms of cultural and ideological colonization. So, in this pretext, the question of self became important at the state level. That provides the basis for the civilizational revolution. States start branding themselves with their core identities, and those identities are rooted into the culture, civilization, and moral values. In primordial sense, China, Russia, India, um, Iran, and Turkey, they qualify to be as a civilization state. Now, the next question is how civilization states are different than the nation states. Martin Jacques, in his work, When China Rules the World, drawn a sharp comparison between the civilization state and the nation, civilization state and nation state, identifying the six benchmarks. For example, identity, unity, responsibility, uh, diversity, historical coverage, and geographical coverage. So let's begin with the identity. Identity for the civilization state stem from the culture, such as language, family, values, social relations. However, for a nation state, identity stems from the constitution. In that sense, civilization identity is more primordial, while the nation state's identity is modernist. So for civilization state, the unity of civilization is a politics defining policy. However, for nation state, unity is a national unity. For civilizational state, the maintenance and preservation of the unity is a sacred responsibility and duty of the state. While for the nation state, responsibility is only driven by the constitution, where the rights and responsibilities are specifically defined in the constitution. So, for civilizational state, uh, racial hegemony is a primary feature for accounting the diversity. However, in nation state, racial and ethnic diversity is accommodated. Uh, for civilization state passed as the reference and standard for today. However, nation state, national tradition, customs, and myths are celebrated. For civilizational state, geographical coverage is exclusive link with the history, while the nation state geographic coverage is constitutionally guaranteed and the national. Now, come third question: to what extent culture or civilization serves as an agency to stimulate the foreign policy actions? So, concerning this question about the civilizational identity in international politics is a complicated task. As if we take agency as the capacity, condition, or state of exertion of power, then the allocation of two fundamental roles, specifically capacity and assertion of power, requires testimony. So, however, when a state declared itself as a civilization state, then it required causal relations between the civilizational feature and the core geopolitical and geoeconomic uh, preferences and priorities. Then the cultural or political interaction constitute a very different agency, can only be analyzing into the respective settings and the context. When the state's immediate priority is security and survival, then the civilizational agency lacks legitimacy of the capacity, exertion of activeness, and exertion of power. Generally, security, political economic gains, payoffs represent more asserting agency than the civilization. So, however, the civilization or the cultural identities are instrumentalizing for the self identification and represent a distinct community than the others to gain maximum within the domestic politics. So now the fourth question: how the pluralistic structures shaping the world order. So let's take the pluralism first to define. If we define the pluralism is a belief that the diversity and uh, multiple perspective coexisting in a polity is both inevitable and beneficial. It emphasizes the mutual respect among the cultures, groups, and individuals, recognizing that no single perspective or value has monopoly on the truth or validity. If we attempts to analyze the pluralism within the multipolar world order that refers to, I would like to introduce as the four structures. For example, the multiplicity, autonomy, countervalence, and openness of the system. The first structure rooted into the nomenclature itself, the pluralism, meant uh, multiplicity by definition acknowledges the existence of multiple power centers in the system. The secondly, autonomy refers to the denial of the single actor's monopoly over the system. Rather, each actor of the system holds autonomy and co-constitute the system. Thirdly, uh, covariance refers to the consistent competition among the actors of the system. In
Excuse me,
multipolar,
my friends, 1 minute.
sorry, okay, I'm just going to finish it very quickly. So it refers to the competition among the actors of the system. In multipolar system, there is no fixity of determination nature of the system. So instead of the actors evolve in its own pursuance, nationalistic perspective. And the fourth one is openness of the system refers to the nature of external attractions. It's not confined or not restricted to the poles. It permits to interact with the external actors of holistic systems, especially the middle and the regional powers. So, in conclusion, I'm keeping in view the analysis on these uh, perspectives and raise questions about the civilizational states, pluralistic structures of the multipolarity. I would like to conclude my debate with the few conclusions. Civilizational revolution would encourage the self-identification and reject the liberalist, globalist, universalist agenda in cultural domain that would allow the cultural relativism in the international level. Then the civilization state would not accept incompatible values to their domestic culture. Then the geopolitical interest drives states definitely directions. Foremost priority would be the security and survival. Security dilemma will be continue and would always put the state into the consistent competition. And the final conclusion is acknowledgement of the pluralistic revolution at the global politics demands the inclusivity reside in equality, tolerance, and mutual respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Sayed. So we have another guest who is not in the program, who is Stefan Gajic. So Stefan, will you have time to perform, right? So I know that you are pressed for time, but please, Stefan is a PhD in political science, researcher at the Institute of European Studies in Belgrade, Serbia. The topic is colonial approach of the West on Serbian space, the example of the Srebrenica resolution. So please take the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. And unfortunately or fortunately, my presentation will be more contemporary. Serbia and Serbs, as such, are a contact civilization, which means that we are, let's say, the most Western outpost of confluence of Slavic people and Orthodox Christianity, or what Konstantin Leontiev would say, Byzantism and Slavhood. That is why, as a border civilization, we were and most probably will be always an object of colonial attack, of colonial approach, which was the case not only for the Serbs, but for the Slavs in general, who are in contact with the Western civilization. Especially, it goes for the Western Russian lands, today's Belarus and the Ukraine, which is the Western Russian lands. And as such, Of course, it is a zone of constant conflict and struggle. As Professor Dugin just said, we are in the war, and the intellectual warfare is not of less importance compared to the actual fighting. And what we are constantly seeing is the war of ideas and the war of narratives. What happened last night at the General Assembly of the United Nations was exactly that, the war of narratives. And there was an attempt, I would say, from the globalists to stir up confusion in the emerging anti-colonial coalition, to stir confusion among the world's global majority. And even if we look at the results of voting, we would see that, for instance, the great coalition that was formed, which is Russia, China, and Iran, they voted differently. So Russia and China voted against the resolution, and revolution, and Iran voted in favor of it, which means that in a strange turn of events, it was voting on the same side with the United States. So the point that I really want to make is that we should not accept the imposing of narratives as such, because I think that is the core problem. The core problem that was faced by people like Frantz Fanon in his famous book, The Wretched on the Earth, or by William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, who actually had the same idea as the Russian philosopher Nikolai Trubetskoy. He probably didn't know each other, although they lived at the same time. They didn't know probably about each other's ideas, but the idea of Nikolai Trubetskoy is that the so-called cosmopolitanism is actually a covered version of Romano-Germanic hegemony of what he called Romano-Germanic basically means Western in today's language. And the same goes for Mr. Du Bois or Dubois, who thought that by living in somebody else's paradigm, let's call it the Western paradigm, the colored people, which are not only black people, actually, I think Slavs, me included, also go under this definition of colored, which is more a sociological definition than a racial one. That basically the colored people are constantly lagging behind because they are judging themselves from the eyes of the whites. And I think that is exactly the problem of at the international arena. If we let the so-called whites, but what I mean is the Western hegemon, which has nothing to do anymore with any kind of racial division, if we let them constantly create narratives, and if we are reactive towards these narratives, then we are doomed to lose any kind of fight and struggle today or in the future. That is why I think that it is of utmost importance for us, let's say for the global majority, to create narratives, to create philosophy, to create history at the end of the day. This struggle did not start yesterday, and it won't end today or tomorrow. I think that although there is a lot of enthusiasm about the multipolarity, this is not an order that already exists in a form. It is, and we don't know how it will look like in the future. But what we should be doing is not letting ourselves to play the maze that is not created by us. Of course, now we can say who are us, because we are talking about multiple civilizations. But the main, I would say, goal, the short-term goal, is not to be fooled by the oldest trick in the book, and that is the one of divide and conquer. Thank you very much. Thank you for the time, and I'll give the floor to somebody else.
Thank you so much, Seven. So we appreciate that you joined us. Thank you. So now we are going to welcome Amal Salim Wakdan, a PhD in political science and the chairwoman of Sheikh Hassan Foundation for Culture and Science. She is from Al-Biran, occupied Palestine, and the topic is Western globalism's attack on national cultures. So please, Amal, you're welcome. So Amal, are you with us?
We can't hear you.
I unmuted
Yes.
mic. It's great. Thank you, Sophia. It's great to be with you all discussing these important issues that are very important for the majority of the world population. I will try to be to take only 7 minutes. But if I get interrupted by my coughing, excuse me. I have a bad flu. Okay, so understanding Western, I'm going to talk about Western globalization's attacks on national cultures. Understanding Western globalism and its ramifications on global geopolitics, sociocultural environment, and humanity. Rectification of the course of history by rectification of the names. In emerging from the intensive development of modern global capitalism and imperialism, Western liberal globalism prevailed and reached its peak in the 21st century in Western Europe, Americas, and Oceania. This cruel and savage creature of the Industrial Revolution and centuries of military, economic, political, cultural, and linguistic colonization of intercontinental, multinational, and multiracial territories of the globe has transformed the status of the world's political economy of nation states in the Northern Hemisphere into unprecedented levels of wealth and power at the expense of the global South colonized countries, which suffered and are still suffering from the outcome of colonization, i.e. devastation, slavery, poverty, exploitation through a selective of procedures and mechanisms. A centralized unipolar Western global hegemony has established a one-world system of thoughts, concepts, and ideals, extending its influence and control over international spheres and markets, particularly in pre-colonial countries, through a network of multinational companies, effectively becoming a de facto world government. This borderless world surpasses state policies, laws, and regulations in all dimensions: economy, politics, diplomacy, culture, language, media, ideology, education, and ethics. It has exploited the global structure of the world, which was established after World War II, to govern the world's new system that was supposed to prevent wars and to achieve peace, prosperity, and justice to humanity at large. Instead, the Western unipolar globalization system has had to legitimize its appropriation of the world's resources across all countries by leveraging international institutions and organizations. These include the United Nations Security Council, UN Assembly, and its sub-organizations. The International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, which were negotiated at the UN as independent entities, also were controlled by the West. This system is also dominating the fiscal world, the International World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, in addition to the NATO, of course, its military arm. The West has manipulated these institutions to protect its interest and maintain the power of the global elite. This involves resorting to regime change, sanctions, blockades, and justified wars, either directly or indirectly through proxy militia groups to establish their world order without regard for human lives, values, or principles. Occupied Palestine since 1948, Syria and Russia's special military operation in Ukraine are striking examples of existential resistance against NATO-imposed wars, aiming to restore genuine national identity, independence, sovereignty, justice, and human dignity. The Western assault on national culture is one of the most insidious and convoluted systems, employing an array of mechanisms, organizations, and tools that defy imagination. As a potent and influential soft weapon, these cultural attacks have achieved more than military invasions themselves over the last 3 decades, leveraging new digital technologies, social media, and artificial intelligence. The global government and its peripheral operation room have distorted people's understanding of their own history, faith, traditions, education, language, family structure, health, and lifestyles under the disguise of modernization, political system reform, and regime change. The West has manipulated people, turning them into machines controlled by computer chips, ready to serve their masters in various missions, such as engineering and fighting internal religious, racial, and ethnic conflicts that could easily escalate into devastating regional or world wars. If we consider the capitalist mass production of commodities and accumulation of wealth as a significant achievement of the Western elites, it is astonishing to see the progress, between brackets, Western globalization has made in the past 4 decades in manufacturing cultural industries. These include educational curricula, research centers for cultural studies, cultural centers and embassies reaching out to intellectuals, writers, graduate students, arts center, the entertainment industry, such as Hollywood style, music and sports. The West has become an industry of dirty wars, death, savagery, terrorism, corruption, and chaos. In conclusion, the war against the West, our common enemy, which began over a century ago in our region, the Levant, is an ideological and geopolitical struggle. It has intensified over the past 40 years, taking various shapes and forms. In August 2015, for example, Russia made a historic decision to intervene in the West's proxy war against Syria, marking a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape of the region's future. Today, Russia's special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine is a conflict with the West, embodied by NATO, its military force. This challenging war has the potential to escalate into a global conflict, but Russia is determined to play a major role in shaping the new world order agreed upon by the multipolar movement. With a collective and right vision supported by national, regional, and global mechanisms, together we can win this war because we are on the right side of history and humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Amal. So a very inspiring talk. And the next speaker is Jamal Bakim, professor in Beirut, Lebanon. The topic is how the United States used takfirism and Islamophobia for its own geopolitical objectives. So please, you're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be as brief as possible. I would like to note that over the past 2 centuries, the Arab Islamic civilization or the Arab Islamic identity was the most distorted and the most manipulated by the West in order to fit its own agenda. This includes also the historians of the 19th century who actually established schools of history in the West and projected them onto the world, setting the platform for all our modern understanding of history, which should be reviewed. I just want to note that the term Semitic itself is an invention of the 19th century that has never been mentioned before, and it was taken from the Old Testament, from the Bible, and projected onto the history of the people of the region, of the Arab region. We never had any, let's say, archaeological excavations that mentioned this word or this name. Anyways, I'll focus mainly on how the United States and the West, mainly the Anglo-Saxon West, used the Takfiri movements under the banner of political Islam, or a version of political Islam, to fit its agenda. And first, part of political Islam was promoted by the British during the 1930s and 1940s as a mean for them to counter communism all in the Arab Islamic world on one hand, especially that communist parties were getting established in Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and it was also a mean for them to divide and rule. After the Second World War, actually, we remember that Mufti Amin al-Husseini, for example, who was the Palestinian national leader at the time, or the leader of the Palestinian national movement at the time, played a major role in recruiting Muslim youth from North Africa and from the Balkan states in order to fight alongside the Germans. Once the Germans got defeated, the West not only recruited former SS and Gestapo operatives and officers to serve it in its new Cold War against the Soviet Union and the socialists, but also recruited these young Muslims at the time as a mean for them to promote them in the Arab Islamic region that was starting to fight against colonialism. So during the Cold War, a version of Islam, or let's say some clerics that were promoted by the CIA and by some radical, let's say, or monarchical Arab states, they promoted what we call a radical version of political Islam, or the Takfiri Islam, who served mainly in Afghanistan, and some of them even served during the Yugoslavian civil war of the early 1990s. Well, after this introduction, I would like to point that the strategy of the United States has been elaborated since the 1990s as to counter the rise of potential challengers to its hegemony, including Europe, Russia, China, India to a lesser extent, but mainly these were the main contenders to its power. So that's why they promoted an agenda as to drive a wedge between these powers and prevent them from having access to Africa. That will be the main arena for competition between the new superpowers, or the rising superpowers, due to the huge African potentials in terms of natural resources and unused markets. So that's why we see that, the region that borders Europe, the Orthodox world, the Chinese Buddhist world and India is mainly or predominantly inhabited by Muslims. And this was the reason why the United States wanted to control this region by building walls between it and all other identities and civilizations, such as the Western European one, the Russian Orthodox, the Chinese, and the Indian, because this would serve as to block first the access of Eurasian powers such as Russia and China towards the East Mediterranean, and also help prevent Europe from having direct access to Africa, and this would lead them actually to or make the Europeans depend on the Americans in order to have access to Africa. So in this sense, we see that on one hand, the Americans promoted their version of radical Islam, which is the Takfiri or the terrorist version, that was always used as a mean to justify certain American policies for to dominate this region, and at the same time to drive a wedge between the Arab Islamic world and the neighboring contingent civilizations. So this is how we saw that the moment, for example, there are still questions about the incident that happened in on September 11 in 2001. The United States, even without prior investigation, jumped into the conclusion that it was Afghanistan that should be the target for invasion. And this drew the farthest, or the farthest that the Americans would go in determining the borders of the Middle East that they wanted to control. At the same time, we see that, for example, there were weak pretexts for the invasion of Iraq, and then thereafter, after the invasion, we had the rise of various terrorist groups that served as a mean and a new type of war that was waged by the United States in order to ensure its control over the Middle East. Now, due to this, on one hand, Islamophobia, which is to present Islam as a violent religion and culture on one hand, and at the same time, by using the Takfiri movements, the United States was able to drive a wedge between Western Europe on one hand and the North Africa on the other hand, and transform North Africa as a buffer zone between Europe and sub-Saharan Africa. At the same time, it used the Takfiri movements in under this Boko Haram, for example, a version of Takfiri movements, to drive a wedge between the predominantly North African Arab Muslim countries and the sub-Saharan predominantly African Christian or animist Africa. Also, due to this, for example, radical Islam, it was able to drive a wedge between the Arab Islamic world and India, also between the Arab Islamic world and China, and this explains why the United States is promoting or sponsoring a secessionist movement in Xinjiang region, and also it attempted to do the same in Chechnya, for example, and in the Caucasus in the early 90s and the early years of the millennium. So, and lately, a few weeks after this multipolarity forum that was held in Moscow, and I had the honor to attend this this conference, and I believe that Dr. Amal was there too. So, and the most striking element in this, let's say, conference was to build the bridges with the Arab Islamic world from by the side of Russia. And a few weeks later, we had this terrorist attack that was all of a sudden blamed by the West on Takfiri groups. in order to drive a wedge between the Russians and who are predominantly, for example, Orthodox, and the Islamic world. So this is how this takfiri movements and this distortion of Islam or the Arab Islamic identity was manipulated by the West. I would also like to note that there was another example, which is that of Yugoslavia. For example, in the early 1990s, dismantling Yugoslavia served the interests of the United States to stir up troubles in the heart of Europe, and that's why I believe that the United States was mainly the reason behind this civil war that erupted there. Some elements of takfiri groups, for example, were used in Bosnia, for example, against the Serbs. I'm not taking sides in this sense, but I'm trying to note facts. And at the same time, some figures such as Ali Izetbegovic, who was sponsored by the West at the time, all of a sudden became the figurehead of a national movement in Bosnia. So these serve as examples of how the United States used takfiri groups and some radical Islamic movements under the banner of Islamic nationalism in order to drive a wedge between the Arab Islamic world and the neighboring cultures and civilizations as part of its agenda to control or to facilitate its control of the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Jamal. So now we are going to give the floor to Olga Bonch-Osmolovskaya, candidate of historical sciences from St. Petersburg, Russia. So please, Olga, the floor is yours.
Hi, dear friends. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good day to you all. Today I'm going to talk about man on the frontier of tradition. And this topic I found when I was thinking about the beginning of active hostilities in Donbass on February 2022, which horrified, obviously, many people, especially young people, and I can say overturned the established view on the world. Yes, wars had happened before, but they were out there somewhere, far away, and although from a distance everyone was horrified and empathized with the refugees, the suffering, and the dead, still most people, we have to admit, perceived these events with a sense of some illusory distant wars and conflicts. And those wars did not directly touch their borders and their daily life. And several generations of young people grew up in such an environment, who were accustomed to condemn distant war without having any idea of a nearer one. And what I want to discuss is that the military conflict certainly takes place in the dimension of the conflict in the sphere of ideas. And suddenly it turned out that over the past decades, we have been so keen on encouraging the spread of Western culture that we have paid very little attention to preserving our own basis in all the above mentioned spheres of culture, politics, economy, and so on and so on. And I would like to address the sphere of spiritual confrontation, which, according to the logic of the development of events, will only intensify in the near future. And this spiritual confrontation should be considered through the prism of the philosophy of tradition, at least to my mind. This allows us to analyze not only the political, cultural, historical, or ideological backgrounds of the events, but also to put them into a broader epistemological and theoretical context. I'm primarily interested in the localization of this spiritual conflict. Where exactly does it take place? And in this regard, I will propose a formula of the frontier of tradition as a zone where civilizational cultural models collide, meanings and values are shifted or deliberately substituted, where worldviews and images are restructured. Tradition is usually considered to be something unchangeable once and for all, and accordingly, innovation within tradition is mostly regarded as deviation from the tradition. I would like to look at this problem from a slightly different angle. To analyze the phenomenon of the frontier, it is necessary to think of tradition as a complex field of ideas, norms, and values, which in sum form a system of traditional knowledge, which consists of several conventional zones. So, what are these zones? There is a zone of steadily preserved basis, which is not subject to change or revaluation until a certain point. And there is the frontier zone, which includes ideas, images, and concepts that at a given moment are in the avant-garde of comprehension. It is for this frontier zone and its content that a fierce struggle is waged, as it forms the image of the future and the core of the worldview. This, among all other things, leads us to the problem of comprehending the current war and, in general, the clash of different levels of forces. History gives us examples of how a tradition has emerged from crisis by enriching itself with new meanings. This is how it became possible, for example, to install new meanings in Confucianism through Taoism, or to introduce Tantric Buddhism into practice without turning them into anti-tradition or counter-tradition. Let us take an example from public life. This is an image of, for example, a woman, which until recently was not at all on the frontier of tradition. In traditional societies, women performed certain functions that were considered natural and taken for granted, without representing an independent object of study or controversy. In recent years, though, the situation has changed. The image of a woman, her role and significance are being brought into the frontier, and the image itself is being changed, reinterpreted, distorted. Whether these reinterpreted versions of image of a woman, or you can take any other important image, can remain within the framework of original tradition, or whether the reinterpretation makes them non-traditional, counter-tradition, incompatible with it and opposed to the original tradition, is the key question of the battle of the meanings. For it is the frontier images and meanings that shape the future. This fundamental contradiction is what gives rise to the frontier. So it is generated by the tradition itself as a necessary condition for its transformation, so it won't become just an orthodoxy without life in it. But on the one hand, it is only on the one hand, but on the another, it is also a survival, a renewal of the same tradition. And in this sense, the frontier is very ambiguous, very dangerous zone. It is a place of collision with a hypocritical counter-tradition, where everything is cleverly faked and reflected through a crooked mirror. But at the same time, it is a place of hard creative work of tradition on itself, a place of actualization of the content already embedded in tradition. It follows that some changes turn the tradition upside down and destroy it. For example, the problem of gender, as it has been posed recently, while others actually allow it to continue to exist. The difficulty lies in the fact that being on this looking glass frontier, it can be difficult to distinguish counter-tradition from another round of tradition itself. And contemporary politics and culture reflect this confrontation between tradition and counter-tradition in the preservation, valuation, and normalization of tradition versus the demarginalization, desacralization, and automatization of counter-tradition. On the collision line of these processes, the frontier of tradition manifests itself, in which tradition confronts it, is distorting, I would say, dark double. Obviously, this confrontation has become fiercer in recent years, and the meanings for which the struggle is being waged have become more and more numerous. And thus, I would conclude with that a man, being free in his choice, may prefer, well, actually, he can prefer the side of directing the creative forces in a counter-tradition direction. And since counter-tradition encourages everything that opposes tradition, which implies overcoming, sacrifice, social as opposed to egoistic, and these kind of things, the falling away from tradition is only gaining momentum in the modern world. And in the West, man has become more susceptible to this temptation, which, due to its fundamental simplicity, is much easier and quicker to implement by each of us in everyday life. The complexity of overcoming ourselves inherent in traditional view of the world, of course, will repel a person who has always learned that it is possible not to overcome oneself, but on the contrary, to indulge oneself, to live only for oneself. And this falling away from tradition in the West is taking new and increasingly ugly forms until apparently it finally leads to dehumanization and the construction of essentially human in man. And in this sense, the modern West is certainly counter-traditional, and this counter-tradition is active in it, aggressively spreading outward. And on the other side of this scale, the conventional East, as we could say, the modus of preservation in tradition has become so abundant that it has become rigid and almost kind of paralyzed, lacking the creative ability to oppose a new round of comprehension of its own tradition when West attacks. And in this sense, the East, and actually it also can be applied to Russia as well as Russia, may also one day become counter-traditional if this inaction, this creative passivity continues and no creative impulse comes from the tradition itself, which is from us, basically. Both extremes eventually lead to final collapse because of the aggression of one side and passivity of the another. And man is thus paradigmatically important because in him or in her, in his consciousness and actions, we see this rhythm of tradition's creative work on itself, which takes place primarily through the symbiosis of the traditional basis and the meanings born on the frontier zone. The clash of meanings on this frontier and the struggle with both the mechanical outgrowth of their own content and counter-tradition infernality is manifested first and foremost in man and in his choice. And this is why my today's speech was named Man on the Frontier of Tradition. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Olga, for a brilliant talk. And now we're supposed to have the speaker, Lucas Leirots, who is from Brazil. He's the master candidate in defense and international security at the Brazilian War College and a war correspondent.
Christos Cresce. Hi everyone, thanks for having me at this important conference. My name is Lucas Leirots, I'm a Brazilian journalist, and today I will address the topic of Ukrainian Nazism and its role both in Western geopolitics and its importance for current Ukrainian regime. So, as we know, Ukrainian neo-Nazism is undoubtedly one of the factors of highest attention in the current conflict. We must remember that in his speech announcing the special military operation, the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, set two objectives: demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. And while the concept of demilitarization seems somewhat obvious to everyone, the goal of denazifying Kiev is still seems unclear to Western public, which caused many ordinary people to be deceived by mainstream media propaganda. As well known, the conflict in Ukraine has deep roots and did not begin on February 24, 2022. Since 2014, there has been a severe persecution against ethnic Russians in Donbass, and neo-Nazi militias were largely responsible for such barbarism. Encouraged by the West, Ukraine launched the denazification project, based on the cultural and linguistic genocides, as well as real massacre carried out by ultranationalist militias against ethnic Russians. However, groups like Azov, Aidar, and Prav Sector did not emerge suddenly. there is a long history behind the Ukrainian neo-Nazi phenomenon. The very idea of Ukrainian nationality, separate from the Russian identity, is inherently racist. Since the 19th century, there have been some dangerous but marginal ideas circulating the territory of today's Ukraine, establishing nationalist mythology for the Ukrainian people. We should remember the work of Mikhail Khreshchevsky in his infamous History of Ukraine, in which he presents the idea that Ukrainians were pure Slavs able to defend Europe against the wild Russian Asians. These ideas were fully endorsed in the first half of the 20th century by the Ukrainian nationalist Dmitry Dontsov, one of the biggest agitators of anti-Russian chauvinism at the time. Dontsov proposed the ethnic cleansing on the territory of the Republic of Ukraine, being a precursor to the crimes that would be committed by Stepan Bandera and his affiliated nationalist militia. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, with the aim of destabilizing the Russian Empire and the USSR, Western powers fostered these nationalist sentiments in Ukraine, correctly recognizing them as a key element for destabilizing the entire Russia. The Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany, both monarchical and Nazi, were some of the greatest promoters of anti-Russian nationalism in Europe. Added to this was rich geopolitical the geopolitical knowledge of British professor Halford Mackinder, a geographer who also worked as an emissary from the UK during the Russian Civil War. In exchange for support against the communists, Mackinder attempted to deceive Russian dissidents into accepting Russian territorial fragmentation and Ukrainian independence. Mackinder's objective was simple: to prevent the unity of the heartland, guaranteed by Russia's territorial integrity. He wasn't exactly interested in fostering nationalist sentiments, but his ideas were instrumental in establishing the plan of an independent Ukraine as a permanent goal of Western geopolitics. First British and German, later American objective. During Nazism, these ideas gained strength with the Ukrainian ultranationalist militias that joined the invading German troops. SS officer Stepan Bandera, today seen as a national hero in Ukraine, is perhaps the best known name of the time. The Soviet victory obviously suppressed the nationalist phenomenon along with its biggest sponsor, German Nazism. But the importation of Nazi ideas by the USA through the irresponsible policy of asylum for German criminals, in parallel with the introduction of British geopolitical theory in the American academic circles, made the promotion of Ukrainian nationalism to destroy Russia become an American geopolitical priority. These objectives were very difficult to advance in the Soviet era, but with the social crisis of the 90s, the promotion of nationalism in the ex-communist space was resumed. In 2004, during the Orange Revolution, many Ukrainian nationalist groups were already active, but it was only 10 years later that they achieved enough strength to take over the entire Ukrainian state. With the support of Western intelligence, the Nazis came to power in Kiev and finally implemented the long-awaited denazification project for Ukraine. The barbarism in Donbass was not a historical accident, but the result of a product that had already been developed for many decades. The Ukrainian Nazism is nothing more than a Western mechanism of war against Russia. Just demilitarizing Ukraine would be insufficient, as ideas are weapons, and as powerful as missiles and tanks. And that is why denazification must be achieved, no matter the costs. For Russia, defeating Ukrainian Nazism is the only way to restore peace in its neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
We are going to hand over to Alexander Markovich, who is the Bachelor of Arts in History and the General Secretary of Suvorov Institute in Vienna, Austria. So, Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having the words, dear Sophia. The Russian special military operation symbolizes a watershed in history. Before it, there was an unipolar moment of Western universalism, the uncontested dominance of the trader's mentality, of matter over spirit. Since then, we can witness the multipolar moment, the uprising of the hero's mentality, as coined by Werner Sombart in his anti-Anglo-Saxon World War I manifesto, Händler und Helden, and the revival of the spirit, challenging pure matter once again. As Mr. Korobov-Latintsev mentioned in his essay, the very start of the war in Ukraine was a great moment of joy for all the Russians in the southeast of Ukraine, who heroically resisted the Western putsch regime in Kiev since 2014 and its genocide against everything Russian. Also, the anti-globalist opposition in Europe, not fighting in the trenches of Donbass, but resisting in the lion's den of liberalism, the empire of lies, as coined by President Putin, and its ideologies of transhumanism and globalism, received a glimpse of hope from the start of the struggle. The start of the SMO was the start of the struggle for the liberation of all civilizations from Western hegemony. And not only Russian heroes are directly fighting the walled evil of globalism. Since October 7th of 2023, also the Palestinian resistance joined the fight against the barbarism of Western human rights ideology, which only recognizes so-called enlightened Western people as humans, whereas everyone else, not bowing to liberalism, capitalism, and materialism, isn't regarded as human anymore. Whereas they are joined by Hezbollah in this fight against the contamination of Al-Aqsa Mosque, the movement of Ansar Allah in Yemen challenged Western maritime hegemony in the Red Sea. As Europeans aware of our Christian heritage and deeply moved by the eschatological dimension of this conflict, which, as Russian philosopher Professor Alexander Dugin pointed out, is not only a geopolitical clash between land and sea, but also between the civilization of Christianity and the Antichrist, we are often posing ourselves the question, what can we do in this global struggle against Western hegemony? Since our peoples, may it be Austrians, Germans, Frenchmen, Italians, are overwhelmingly seeing themselves as part of the West, how can we rectify our names, as Russians are currently doing in Eurasia? As the great philosopher Martin Heidegger recognized, we Europeans no longer knew who we are. We are suffering from Seinsvergessenheit, no longer conscious of our being, which leads us into the oblivion of being, fatally mixing philosophy with faith and the belief in science. With the end of Renaissance and the triumph of the nation state over the empire, of materialism over the spirit, the atomist thinking over Plato and Aristotle, and in conclusion, European civilization was fundamentally changed. When we left behind or forgot about the holy, profanity took over the minds of the Europeans, leading us to the hubris of taking the material wealth produced by overseas trade and capitalism to be a sign of a supposed European superiority. The urge to conquer in the name of civilization left European civilization itself as an empty hull behind, as German philosopher Carl Schmitt noticed in his work Der Nomos der Erde. Europe turned into anti-Europe. The West, even long before Americanization, started the mental colonization of the old world with the consumer society and its black miracles. As the philosopher Vladimir Varvara pointed out, the West became part of a culture of euthanasia simultaneously. No longer life was considered as a constant struggle against one's own demons and sins, a chance to purify one's souls through repentance before the eye of God, but as an opportunity to find as much leisure as possible. We are behaving like little children, seeking as much pleasure as possible, whereas we push away every kind of responsibility for our own deeds. Of course, this fact was not only registered by Europeans themselves, but especially by Russians. As one of the founding fathers of Eurasianism, Prince Nikolai Trubetskoy, mentioned in Europe and Mankind, European chauvinism and cosmopolitanism are two sides of the same coin. More often, they go hand in hand. As classical liberalism begot nationalism, the woke liberalism 2.0 gave birth to neo-fascism and neo-Nazism. Whereas classical Western capitalists, moved by the ideas of social Darwinism and Malthusianism, founded fascist movements to fight communism and USSR, nowadays so-called philanthropists, moved by new Malthusianism, the concept of climate change and population reduction, and globalism, are founding movements like the chauvinist nationalist of Azov, the right sector, and millenarian Protestant, Wahhabi, and Zionist fundamentalists. Whereas every fundamental opposition against this deeply inhumane system inside the West is demonized and ostracized as fascist, communist, or anti-Semitic by Western media and elites, Real fascists are murdering Russians with Western help in Ukraine. Wahhabi West extremists are running amok in parts of Syria, and Israeli settlers are committing a genocide right before our eyes on the Muslim and Christian population of Palestine. Of course, still with the help of Western governments. If we would rectify the flag of the postmodern empire of the European Union, it would no longer consist out of a blue flag with yellow stars. Its true colors would be the symbol of cosmopolitanism, LGBTI movements, and the destruction of European culture, the rainbow flag. Whereas in its center, one would see the swastika as a symbol of European chauvinism. Behind the friendly, pink, open-minded facade of postmodern civilization, in the West, there lurks in the shadows a deep, frightening, and brutal abyss of chauvinism, ready to assimilate and liquidate everything it deems as the other. Therefore, we must start to struggle for the truth and fight academia with counter-academia, media with counter-media, and elites with counter-elites. As the Chinese philosopher Confucius once said, if concepts are confused, the world is in disarray. Therefore, the idea of the great rectification of names proposed by Mr. Korobov-Latintsev is also an imperative for Europe. As long as we keep living inside the lies uttered by Western elites, we will not be able to liberate ourselves from the satanic civilization of globalism. Not only Russia needs to proceed with its project of the great Russian rectification of names, but there also is the dire need for a great European rectification of names. Only if we are fighting the lies of Western elites and countering them with the truth of God, we can wake up the true Europe who lies in the deepest corners of hell. As a friend of mine, the great Russian Eurasian martyr of the multipolar world, Daria Dugina, once said, we as philosophers must return to the depths of the Platonic cave in order to enlighten those still trapped in the illusions of the shadows. We need to become eschatological optimists, fighting for the light of truth, even if it means our demise in this world, because our struggle is for eternity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right within time. Brilliant. So thank you. And the last speaker, but not the least, our respected professor of political philosophy at Uni Dolomiti, Belluno, Italy, Lorenzo Maria Pacini. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, and to all the speakers previously for the invitation. So, to conclude with Sobor, I would like to introduce, following the words stand at the beginning of our meeting by Professor Alexander Ilyevich Dugin, about the importance of one of the main concepts of the Chinese Confucian tradition, that is the concept of community of destiny. By a Western perspective, the primordial term is communitas, that comes from Latin and means actually which is common to many or to all, which is shared. So it indicates in an abstract sense the common being, the commonality, the particular between persons united by relations that forms a whole. This has had an important evolution in all the ethnos of the Western societies, of all the Western people. And so I believe that the life of societies is subject to a number of immutable laws, as is the life of individuals. So how could we define a community of destiny and why? I think it could be a political, interesting option to follow the development of a multipolar world and to rectify the names, not only Russia, but in the whole world. The community of destiny is at first a community that exists sharing spiritually and materially the same existence, so pursuing the same ends. So a community, I could say in the most authentic and original sense of the term, as a communion of lives. But we need to make distinctions. So destiny is not the mere similarity that can be found between people due to belonging to the same social class, occupation, studies completed, etc. Because in that case, we are talking about destinies that resemble each other, but are not a single destiny. However common their status, the men we have spoken of remain profoundly separate from one another. So we need a different method. We need hearts united, minds united, purposes, intentions, spirits. The typical example of such a community is that of the family, the traditional family, an organic community par excellence, whose very structure implies a rhythm of exchanges between the different members that are almost as intimate and continuous as both between the members of the same body. That is the meaning of a body as an organic in a Platonic sense. And if we try to transpose this to a political set, we find that the true community of destiny, following the Confucian tradition, may include the similarity of destinies, but it does not demand it. On the contrary, it demands an organic solidarity, the existence of vital bonds between people. So striking proof of the vital importance of this form of community lies in the fact that wherever it's abolished, societies do not slow to break down. If we look to the history, monarchies, feudal lordships, etc., arriving to the modern states, we see the same. As we lost the meaning, the profound, deep meaning of community that stays at the center, we lost the direction of our community. So the community of destiny has several advantages, not only sociological and political, but also psychological, if we want, because which happily influence social life. Firstly, it fosters the love that is the soul of every social unit. So it's clear that we are more likely to love the being who lives alongside us and shares our joys and risks than a distant stranger. Solidarity creates a climate conducive to sympathy, as happens, for example, in mutual aid and support, as we saw during the special military operation between the people in Russia, but also between the people along the world. Taking the second example, that is the war in Gaza. So what we feel, what we see here is this communion that can be maybe considered as a kind of sociological and political different structural point of view, as Dugin said at the beginning, considering the world civilization and not a traditional world, as a point to start a new conception of politics. The community thus understood appears to be a great political utility. The contemporary world is increasingly showing the ineffectiveness of all the forms of political expressions of the humans as the political parties. And so in this sense, communities of destiny stand as an example of political organicity, because they are easy to implement, do not require many resources, they adapt to every context, they respect all traditions and different models of civilization. So, to conclude, communities of destinies represent the form of expression of each civilization model or pole, if we want, more by a geopolitical aspect, and are versatile and adaptable to further political forms, even new ones that have not yet been discovered and explored, like the fourth political theory. Without the community, which is the core of the civil society, over political models cannot develop. So, to conclude, community of destiny in itself is a dimension of political alchemy that makes it possible to transform the entire world through the gradual modification of its internal micro elements, generating variations in the collective imagination, in the social nous of people, changing all the noological balances with which conflicts between peoples occur. This is very important because it reminds us how change in large political space needs to start from small groups. The healing of society, understood both locally and globally, passes through many small possible steps. This is an offer to consider these communities as a possibility for a new political development, passing by the rectification of political distance. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, dear Professor Lorenzo, and all the guests and all the participants, all the speakers of today's conference. We were so happy to have you here today. And I believe that each talk that you made and each talk in the future that you are going to make is a step to our common victory, the victory of the multipolarity. So we are going to share the video of the event of the Sobor in 2 weeks, no earlier, unfortunately. And we're still accepting the papers for publication. So not everybody has sent it to us. So please don't forget about that. So your articles, your papers are worth to be read by the world. Thank you so much. So yeah, I believe that we can finish.
Dear friends, if probably you want to share some opinions after listening to each other's speeches, you can share it now, or we have all rights to end our beautiful conference. So it's up to you. If someone wants to say something, you're most welcome. If no, then we can just in a written way to continue discussing these important topics. So thank you very much, everybody, for participation.